Hello. Get your official products such as this marvelous t-shirt that I'm wearing, or this great coffee mug that I'm drinking out of, and many other products with the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis logo at https://www.zazzle.com/store/astuffstore, and make sure you get your 15% discount today.
Welcome to a new podcast show about stuff. It's the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. Here's your host, Stephen Davis.
It's time for the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. I'm your host, Stephen Davis. Today, my guests are the husband and wife owners of Fyzical Therapy and Balance Centers, headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. David, a doctor of physical therapy, treats the patients, and Dama manages the operations of the facilities, which employs over 20 full-time staff members. Welcome, Dama and David. How are you doing today?
I hope you are. Yes.
I'm doing. Hey, I say this almost every week because people ask me the same thing, and I say, I'm standing up on my own. You can't get any better than that. Now, what I do is I'm going to explore your past life, and then we're going to come up to what you're doing presently. First of all, where are you from? Where did you enter the world in?
I was born on Long Island in New York, and I was raised on Long Island, and I relocated to North Carolina, I guess probably in January of 2012. But I consider myself born and raised on Long Island from New York.
Okay, and do you have any brothers and sisters, or are you a only child?
I am an only child. Yes. Yes.
Did you ever want, or did you ever go to your mother and say, I need a brother?
I did not. I am an only child, true and true. When I was growing up, I did not ask for additional siblings. Only as I've gotten older, sometimes I do wish that I had a sibling that was here or lived here in North Carolina, but I have my husband's family, and I'm okay with that.
Now, where did you go to school? What elementary school did you start off with?
So I went to a Lutheran elementary school. I went to Grace Lutheran in Mount Vernon there in New York on Long Island. And from Grace Lutheran, I went to a wonderful small private high school there, Long Island Lutheran High School, also known as.
How was it growing up then? Now, first of all, we do have a connection. I told your mother before that we have a connection because of your grandfather. Grandfather was the great Clyde McFadder.
Yes.
And he was a singer par excellence, the only person that's the first person that was inducted into the Hall of Fame twice. But our connection, as I said during her broadcast, is that my father and your grandfather were best friends when they were growing up in high school. And I know that in actuality, you moved back to where your grandfather started at, Durham.
That is so true. Yeah, North Carolina.
How was it for you growing up in the shadow of having a famous grandfather?
I didn't, because he had passed away before I came along. But I know that my mom always held him in very high regard and was always very near and dear, to her heart. And I will tell you that although I cannot sing, and my mother definitely cannot say that, she will not get upset with me when she hears me say that. But I have lots of memories. Very stereotypical household, getting up on Saturdays, listening to lots of jazz, lots of R&B at the time, eventually whatever music followed, cleaning the house, running errands. Anytime my mom and I hit the road to take a car drive, music was always such a really big part of that experience. And then as I've gotten older, I appreciate music and the arts in schools. I think it's really important. It gives people an outlet to truly express themselves. And so I really tried to support my mom's passion, because I'm not retired, but my mom's retired. And so she spends a lot of time here in North Carolina working with the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame. And because it's become such a passion of hers, I've adopted it as a small passion as mine as well, because I like to support things that she's into. And like I said, I really do believe that music is really important. And I think that it's something that should be in schools. And I think that children can find a lot of comfort in music. I know that there are lots of artists that when I think about difficult times in my life that I think about. And so there's a lot of things that I believe help the soundtrack of my development as a woman and as a person. And so that's definitely a fond memory is just having that passion, that love for music growing up. So
what was your experience going to school, particularly high school? How was it?
So I had an interesting experience going to high school because I went to a private school in a very wealthy area of Long Island on the North Shore. And I did not necessarily come from the same upbringing as a lot of people in that area. And so I never thought of myself as being disadvantaged or anything like that at the time, although it was very obvious as I'm being driven on a school bus, and I can see people driving down the road with BMWs and fancy sports cars at the age of 16, 17, that this is really something else. But I wasn't as appreciative as getting that education at the time as when I went to college and really realized that I was very blessed to be given that opportunity to attend that school. Because for me, college was never, like, it wasn't a question. It was a question of what college are you going to go to? Because the high school really helped to prepare us to enter into college and to really look at like the next phases, of our lives. But I will say that one of the disadvantages to it that my children now enjoy is that I really didn't have a lot of friends in my community because I didn't go to a school in my community. And so I feel like I did miss out on that aspect of it a little bit, as my kids have kids that they know in the neighborhood and things like that. But I really didn't have an opportunity to have those connections because I was, as they refer to it, as bust out of the neighborhood to attend a different school. So.
Now, what part of Long Island were you in? You were talking about Long Island is a long island.
Yeah.
So what part of Long Island were you from?
So I'm from a small town on Long Island called Lakeview, which is at least at the time in the 80s, it was a African-American enclave there in West Hempstead in Nassau County. You were coming out of Queens off the Southern State Parkway, exit 17 South. My neighborhood was made up of lots of African-American people that worked for the county, that worked in healthcare. They were nurses. They worked at Mercy Hospital. It was definitely a working class neighborhood. Lots of people who worked for MTA there in Lakeview. And the school that I went to was still in Nassau County, but it was on the North Shore, and it was in Old Brookville, which is a very different demographic than Western Nassau County, South Shore for sure.
Okay. Now, David, it's your turn. Where did you make your entrance into the world?
Yeah.
Okay.
5 boroughs, so upbringing was suburban. Mine was traditionally urban. So product of the New York City public school system, better or worse. PS 215 onto PS 183 onto PS 180. And then when it came time for high school, both my parents didn't feel as comfortable with me staying local, and we had the opportunity to test out. So all of my siblings and I, older brother, younger brother, older sister, all of us traveled, I'm gonna say probably at least an hour and 15 minutes from home to go to high school. So I went to school in high school in Brooklyn, Midwood High School.
What I call Brooklyn.
What's that?
That's only because I live in Brooklyn.
Okay.
The center of the universe.
Okay.
Now, I was born in Manhattan, and when I was Manhattan, that used to be the center of the universe, but hey, I'm in Brooklyn now, so
Yes,
Brooklyn is now the center of the universe.
Yes,
But I remember Midwood High, particularly when I was working in that, not far from Midwood High back in the 70s. But how was your experience going to Midwood High?
Wouldn't trade it in. Had its elements of School of Hard Knocks, enriching. Met a lot of great people, still people I stay in contact with today. Social media has helped with that, but very large school. So I don't know how many people were in your graduating class or in your school in general. We had over 5,000 students.
Not close.
It's a very different experience. It's funny, and I played sports. So a lot of people knew me. Well, they knew my last name anyway, because it was written on my back. So people would shout out my last name, and it was it's 5,000 people. So I don't know, I don't know that I ever knew you, but I don't know if you knew me or you just knew my name on my back. But so I guess a little bit of a different experience.
Well, how was your school? How was the high school team record? Well, first of all, what sport did you play?
I played baseball my freshman year of high school, and then I played football sophomore, junior, senior year. So yeah, I played football actually into college. Went to Morgan State University on a football scholarship, but yeah, high school football. Yeah.
Okay. I used to be the chair of Coppin University Foundation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I was
several events at Morgan State.
Okay. Yes, sir.
What year were you at Morgan State?
So I just went for my freshman year. That would have been 98, 99. And so I'm a doctor of physical therapy. It was really around that time, maybe a little before, but it was clear to me that my career was not going to be playing football. It was not going to pay the bills. And so
what was your position?
I was a quarterback.
Oh, okay. You were a glamour boy with your $1 million smile.
All right, but it was clear, and I had an idea already, a very strong idea of what I wanted to do. And 18, 19 years old, you have all the answers, right? Like you have everything. And so I knew that I needed to get the ball rolling on what would ultimately become my career. And it was interesting. Football pretty quickly just became a hurdle. It was in the way of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to become. In retrospect, trading in a full scholarship for a full-time job, I don't know if that was the greatest idea. But in doing so, that full-time job or series of part-time jobs that added up to a full-time job led me to really making a very significant acquaintance that ultimately, maybe I did know more than I thought at 18.
And what college did you go to, Dama?
I went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice there in Manhattan on West 57th Street in New York City on the Upper West Side. Since I was in ninth grade that I wanted to go to John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My mom and I and a friend of hers, we would take frequent trips into the city just to walk around and to see things. And I fell in love with New York City, but I fell in love with the Upper West Side and Columbus Circle and John Jay and huge crime junkie. I absolutely thought back then that I was going to go into some kind of federal law enforcement, FBI, DEA. That's definitely what I wanted to do. And I almost didn't apply to any other colleges because I absolutely knew that I was going to go to John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So my mom made me apply with my guidance counselor to at least 3 other colleges, but I definitely knew that John Jay is where I wanted to get my degree from. And I don't regret it at all.
How was your experience going there?
I did not have the experience where you pack your stuff up and your mom drives you off to campus and you wave goodbye and that was it, because they didn't have dorms. But for me, New York City was my dorm. New York City was my campus. I, as a freshman, had no choice in what classes I took or the times that I took them. And at first, it was like aggravating, but then I started to look through it of the lens of, I just started to get on the subway. And I would ride in various subways from the bottom, the Battery, and go all the way up to Central Park. And I would get off at various stops and just walk around New York City. And I always wanted to become more familiar with the less famous parts of New York City. I didn't want to walk around Times Square. I wanted to walk around Lower Manhattan. I wanted to go uptown. I wanted to go to Harlem. I wanted to see what the Upper East Side was like, Spanish Harlem, and all of these, different places. And my mom and my family wasn't very fond of my explorations as a young woman at the age of 18 with my little Metro card, in my bag as I'm just traveling around. But here I am today. I always made it home. I always, came back in one piece. And I think that those experiences really helped me later in life really be a little fearless at times with certain things, because I got to see so many people. John Jay had so much diversity, and not just with race, with age. There were so many police officers who were getting ready to retire from the NYPD that wanted to do second careers. Some of them wanted to go to law school. Some of them wanted to work in the court system. They wanted to help youth. And so just hearing so many different types of perspectives, I think that was just an invaluable 4.5 years that I spent at John Jay, because I just got to meet so many different kinds of people.
Okay. Now, David, you said that you went to Morgan for just a year?
1 year, yeah.
And then where did you go to?
I transferred back home to state school in New York, SUNY Stony Brook. So that's also Long Island, but on the other end, closer towards that's Suffolk County. And so, yeah, I finished my undergraduate studies there before heading to grad school. But it was very much the commuter's experience. So again, working full time, essentially I had school 2 days a week all day long, and then I worked 5 days a week, felt all day long. It was just ripping and running, and it was a phase of life that, to some extent, I feel perhaps I missed out on certain elements of college life, not being on campus, or when the studies have wrapped up, heading to the train and making my way back, or eventually driving, and that was a long commute as well. But the other side to that is when I finished my studies, eventually even grad school, I had some experience, some life experience. It wasn't like you're completely wet behind the ears and you're not like have to interact with people and completely new to the workforce. There's a work ethic and some things that I wouldn't trade that in either. I don't know that going to a couple more parties or whatnot, whatever I missed would have been worth it. Well worth it. I like the experience.
It sort of reminds me of my own experience, because I went for a while to Baruch College. And I was already, as you did, had a full-time job, and the professor would say things, and there were a group of us who said, we go to work every day. We know that's not true. You're giving us theory. We're going to tell you what life is about because we're out here. So I understood that. Now, after undergrad school, Dama, did you go directly to your graduate school?
I did. So I knew that I wanted to achieve more than a bachelor's degree. At that time in my life, I was dealing with a few things personally with my grandmother and my great-grandmother at the time that made me realize that I really have a knack for helping people and that I can be very resourceful. And so I decided to pursue social work at that time. I decided that I wanted to work with children and families, but I wanted to be.
You sound like your mother. You sound exactly like your mother when I interviewed her. But go ahead. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No, it's true. I decided that I wanted to pursue clinical studies to be a mental health counselor first. And social work was very interesting to me, but I really wanted to do it from like a clinical aspect, to really work with children, work with families, to help keep families intact, and to keep working with the youth. Because I was doing some part-time jobs working with some youth on Long Island, and it was pretty rewarding, but it was also frustrating because it showed me that there are a lack of options for mental health treatment at that time. I still feel like that's the case, and definitely a lack of mental health providers that looked like a lot of the youth that I was working with. But by that time, David and I had met each other, and we were really making moves together to make the decision that we were really in this for the long haul. And so when it came time for me to look at graduate programs, it was something that David and I were doing together. We wanted to make sure that we found a school that had both of our programs, because we decided that we did not want to pursue the long distance relationship thing. That was not something that one of us felt was going to be, very successful. So we narrowed down a list to a few schools, and we both decided that we were going to apply to Hampton University. that was a school that ended up being at the top of our list. So that is how I ended up at Hampton University for my master's degree in counseling.
It seemed like you all did, both of you all did reverse of what was normal up until that time. And that was generally you went to a school like Morgan, HBCU, and then you went to a other university, but y'all did it backwards. But it does show how much those universities like Hampton has progressed. Yes. Because you would never have thought about going to them for your doctorate degree back in the day, back in my day. Now, it's wonderful to know that. David, now you went back to, y'all both go back to Hampton University. How was it?
That was the most challenging 3-year period academically, easily, hands down, of my life. There were a lot of literally sleepless nights studying around the clock. People, it's a beautiful country there, right? Like, you know, people say, oh, you're not far from Virginia Beach and you got this, you got that. And I'm like, I believe you. I don't know. Like, I remember studying a lot. That's what I remember. So that was my experience. It was just really hard. Met some folks there that, again, still keep in touch with today. Really good people, successful people. Made some good connections. I'm always proud to be able to say that, HU, and have that pride. And now where we live, there's a number of HBCUs. And so we interact with people from all types of HBCUs in the area. And to offer HBCU love is something real to me. I'm happy that we made that decision. And that was one of the better decisions, I think, of all of the different options.
Who was the president of Hampton at that time?
Harvey.
Dr. Harvey.
I met him a long time ago. Yes, I met him a long time ago. As a matter of fact, a long time ago, I had gone to Hampton for something, and the buildings looked so old at that time. It was like, I'm back in the 40s, but I see that they have made tremendous progress, as all of them. Yes. Now, do both of y'all graduate the same year?
Yes, that timeline was a little bit strange. So there was also mixed in there. So life came out as fast. We got engaged after we got engaged before we left for, let me not make that mistake. I don't believe that we would have been going anywhere out of state together had she not had a ring on her finger. Let's be clear. So we got engaged before we left for grad school. I messed that up. We were definitely engaged when we went, but there were some promises made, commitments made. Okay, we got married at the end or between year 1 and 2. Okay, and then just before my studies had been completed, just before my 3rd year was completed, he gave birth to our daughter, our first child. And so I'm trying to remember the timeline. I had 9 months to go, or a little less, when you realized you were pregnant. And so she really had this urge to be closer to her mom. And so I understood it. I don't know how else to receive that. So she went back to New York, and I knew that we were ultimately going to end up back in New York from Virginia. So the last few months I was still in Virginia, just doing some studies and some clinical work before moving back and then finishing up my in-clinic studies in New York, and she had already beaten me there.
Yeah, so. I very quickly after I found out we were expecting our first child, I hightailed it right back to New York, to my comfort zone. I wanted to be close to my mom, someone who had done it before, and I actually wanted to be close to his mom because David is one of 4. And so I definitely wanted to be in between the moms as things progressed with my first child. So I was happy to come home. I had no problem finding a job. I got my first job as a social worker at Catholic Charities there on Long Island for the Diocese of Rockville Center. And we were good. We were just waiting for him to finish physical therapy school, to really jumpstart his career as a PT. And I was planting my feet in the ground as a new social worker, a new mom, a new wife, all of those things at that time. Our daughter was born in 2007. So we were establishing, getting back up in New York 2006-ish, the beginning of 2007-ish. So.
Now, David, did you, Hampton wasn't where you got your doctor's degree, is it?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. So you went to both master's and doctorate at Hampton?
By then, and Hampton was the first school, PT school in Virginia to offer the doctor's terminal degree. So one of the criterion for entry to apply and be accepted into PT school is a bachelor's degree. And so from your bachelor's to your doctorate, that's the transition now, most anywhere. You'd be hard pressed to find a school that does not offer the doctorate, but it goes straight from bachelor's to doctorate. So it's a 3-year program after your bachelor's.
Okay, now, when you left, you graduated from Hampton,
Right.
did you go back to New York? You had to go back to New York because you had somebody waiting for you. That's a dumb question.
Let me be clear. I was in New York before graduation. So I'm sitting beside the most organized person I've met in my life. Okay. So what she didn't say, she left out a couple of things here about when we talked about deciding on grad school. That can be an overwhelming process, just the application process and keeping things organized and dates and whatnot. This woman has a binder and a folder for most anything you could imagine. And so she laid all of that out for me. But once I was in grad school, the last year of grad school is mainly clinical rotations, so clinical affiliations. She established contract with some clinics in New York, thinking ahead that if we're going to end up in New York, maybe you should start networking. My goal was I had 5 clinical rotations throughout PT school. I wanted 5 job offers. And if they were all in Virginia, that's flattering, but it doesn't help me. And so the last 3, Dama had already established them. So we had a plan and we played it out. So the last 3 clinical rotations that I did, I was already in New York. I hadn't yet graduated. I was still a student, essentially working for free. But I got my choice really from those 3 weeks. I got 3 offers. And what ought to be my last day of my last clinical rotation was a Friday. My daughter was born Thursday, the day before. And so they offered me a job. I realized the price of diapers and formula. And I said, I'll take it. And we worked it out. So yeah, but we had it all mapped out. Thanks to them. It was pretty smooth.
Okay, so you moved back to New York. You begin the job. What job did you begin?
So I was a staff physical therapist, low man on a totem pole.
Facility.
So it was a privately owned PT clinic, PT owned. It was called Advanced Physical Therapy. Worked with 3 other PTs. And again, I was the new grad, new hire, but ambitious. I worked with some folks that were good at what they were good at. And most anything else, they pushed it off to the new guy. So I got a lot of like really good experience all in one short amount of time, primarily because of that kind of approach. But I wouldn't trade that in. The owner there, he was really good to me, offered me a lot of good information and accelerated my experience and really enriched the whole process for me. Not really knowing at the time what was 10 years away, what apple we'd be biting and ultimately where we are now. But a lot of that experience really set the tone and the foundation for, in large part, where we are now. So wouldn't trade that in. That was a really great experience. That was the only, I worked a job and a half really because the cost of living in New York is insane. But I worked that job from the day after graduation, literally the day after graduation, right up until when we left for North Carolina.
Okay. Now, when did you go to North Carolina? So when did you make the decision to move? Let me move back. Why did you make the decision to move? Was it money?
Oh, never heard of it. Cost of living was insane. So already we knew that. There was some pressure and stress. And my solution always, like, my father was a provider. He worked really hard, right? My mom worked hard too. My dad was a workaholic. And so I'm sure that's a big part of what's in me. And so when I'm looking at the needs, my solution is I'll work more. I'll work harder. And at this point, when we're nearing the end of our time in New York. Now we have 2 children. Cost of living is not adjusting down, and I'm working a job and a half. And every time there's a new bill, I'm saying I'll work more. And it didn't take long for Dama to look me in the eyes and say, no, you won't. Like, that's not the answer, right? We need to just figure something out. And so we were in limbo. We knew we needed to do something, didn't know exactly what. And I've told this story more times than I can count. So I worked, like I said, a job and a half. I worked double shifts. I wouldn't see the kids on Mondays and Tuesdays because I was leaving, they were sleeping, I get home, they were sleeping. But it must have been a Tuesday. My daughter must have been 3, I guess 3. And she must have stalled, and she was still up on Tuesday. One or two of my later patients canceled, so I got home a little earlier than expected, and she was still awake. And when I walked in, she was excited to see me, and she said, "Daddy, will you tuck me in, and will you help me say my prayers?" I said, "Yeah, of course." Now, in retrospect, I know that my daughter has the skills to be manipulative. She can get what she wants, okay? I don't know that at 3, it was that sharp, but maybe. But this is what she said. This was her prayer. Ready? He said, "Lord, thank you for letting me see my daddy before I fell asleep." And it was all I could do to get out of the room. Like, I felt like, I got out of the room and we spoke that night, and I was like, "Baby, we gotta do better. Let's figure something out. I can do this anyway. Let's figure it out." And really that accelerated the process. And then it just became where. And that wasn't easy. So every place we would visit, going to a wedding here or a vacation or whatever, visiting people, I would say, "Is it here? Could you do here?" And it could have been a million places for me. And she would say, "No, not here." And then we visited some friends in Raleigh. And I asked her, like I always did. And she said, "Maybe." And that maybe was as good as a yes for me. So that just started, and we, again, the binder came out and the folders, and we started making plans, and, it became real. It became practical. It was hard to find a downside to it.
It was.
And
Yeah.
so, we did it. We made the jump, and best move we ever made, no doubt about it.
Yeah. I think a lot of the things that I really loved about New York, I realized after having 2 kids and becoming a family of 4 in a short period of time, was a lot of those things. And honestly, even with 2 incomes, living on Long Island, we couldn't enjoy the things that I loved so much about New York. Just taking the kids to go see a show, it was hundreds of dollars between the parking or the Long Island Railroad tickets and the transportation costs, the tickets themselves. It was just a lot. And it started to just become this thing where, well, why are we staying here? Our families were thinking at the time about potentially starting to relocate themselves and talk about their plans. And I think it made us feel a little bit more secure that, hey, if we move, there's a possibility that we could probably enjoy traveling a little bit more and doing some additional things. And that just became a reality. And for me, I love Long Island. I am a Long Island person, like through and through. I realize that as I get older, that I was born and raised. I'm a Long Island girl. And so for me, I wanted to move somewhere that reminded me of Long Island. And there were different, like in Virginia, I didn't see that. I didn't feel that way at all. I was not a big fan where we lived during those years in Virginia. And there were some places in Georgia that we had been, suburbs of Atlanta, and I said, maybe. But when we came here to Raleigh to a wedding, I actually said, you know what, I can see us here. I could see myself driving down this road with the 2 kids in the car. Like I could see us living in that house over there. I could see us in this neighborhood. And so it became a reality at that point.
Now, when you talked about moving down to North Carolina, and I want to get into your careers because that should be a major part of what we talk about. Mm-hmm. But I want to know, how did your family feel about you moving to North Carolina and taking the kids away?
Okay, so I'm here to tell you that my mother absolutely thought it was the worst idea ever. Couldn't stand it, was just like, why are you, we don't move south, we come north, right? Why are you're going backwards? My mother at that time was already retired, and she just was, I can't believe you're doing this kind of thing. And my grandfather, not Clyde, but my grandfather, my grandmother's husband, he was still alive, and I told him that I wanted to take him down. Now, my grandfather that I grew up with was born in 1934 in rural South Carolina. When I walked into the nursing home that he was staying at, and I told him that not only was I moving to North Carolina, but that I was taking him with us, I thought he practically fell out on the floor. Like he just threw his hands up in the air. He thought I was crazy.
What part of South Carolina?
Charleston, right outside of Charleston.
My father lived in Charleston for a while.
And so he had not been back south, maybe for a funeral here or a wedding there, but anytime he would never talk about going back down south, which is totally understandable. So he definitely was like, no. But I was able to convince both of them that this was in the best interest, begrudgingly, of everybody. And so we all moved. My mom and my grandfather, when we first moved here, my mom and my grandfather both lived in the house that we first moved in when we moved down here. I'm not going to say David's mom wasn't too thrilled either about us moving down south. She had some concerns as well.
Dynamics. You mentioned earlier about being an only child. So wherever we went, it was probably a package deal, right? As an only child, you're not going to leave your mom. Grad school is temporary. We're coming home. But if we're moving, relocating, I knew mom had to be on board. Mm-hmm. And so obviously when we looked for a home and then eventually built a home, it was with Debbie in mind. She's got to have her space, and we've got to make that work and make that make sense for her. I think my mom, me being the third of four, I wasn't the first one to leave the nest and try to figure out your path and whatnot. So I don't know that she was like tooth and nail fighting against it, but she loves her grandkids. And so that's for sure. But also now, like, the world is so much smaller. It's so much easier to manage some of that stuff. But yeah.
I actually could understand your grandfather, because although I was born in New York, my father was in the military. I grew up partially in Fayetteville.
Yes.
And I went to high school at 71st High in Fayetteville. Okay. But in those days, it was quite different. Yeah, it was quite a bit different. And I understand why your grandfather did not want to go back. And I'm sure once he got to North Carolina, he saw some of the changes for what it was, that he was a little bit more amenable to the move.
Absolutely.
Now, when you get down to North Carolina, did you have a job already when you got there, or did you have to look for a job while you were down there?
So I knew that I wouldn't have a problem finding a job. Healthcare, physical therapy specifically, I wouldn't say I don't know if anyone is recession proof, but I was very confident I would not have a problem. I had 3 interviews set up. We moved on a Saturday. I had 2 interviews on Monday and 1 on Tuesday. I canceled the 1 on Tuesday. You know what I mean? Like, I knew we would be okay. At a little bit of a different path. As qualified as she is, perhaps in some cases overqualified, in her field, I don't know if it was coming from New York or what it was. It was a much harder process. And so it was a good, 6 months. 6 months before she found work. So we talked about the cost of living. And so on paper in New York, when you look at, oh, wow, okay, I made that much. I never saw it. It was never in my pocket. I believe you say I made it. I don't know. When we moved here, I took a pay cut because it's a different scale, and she wasn't working. So we were probably making maybe 45, 50% of what our household income used to be, and never been happy. Like, I still can't fully grasp how that was a thing, but we got to settle in. We had the 2 kids, and there's a lot that comes with that. I think, David had a chance to spend time with the kids, and she's never been, in certain ways, we have a traditional relationship, right? We are progressive in a lot of ways, but if something's broken, I'm probably going to fix it. And if there's a meal that needs to be cooked, unless it's breakfast, she's probably going to cook it, and we're fine with that. And so I think that there was, I don't put words in your mouth, but that was important time.
Yeah, it was. Setting up the routines for the kids. It was very important to me that if we were going to move, I really wanted our children to start in the school district in the state. And so we moved right before our oldest was due to start kindergarten in August. And so when we started looking in the winter of 2011, it was really important for me that we selected a home in a neighborhood, and we moved down well before the beginning of the school year because I wanted to get her registered and I really wanted her to start kindergarten. I didn't want to pull her out of kindergarten and have to redo kindergarten in another state and those kinds of issues. And so we were fortunate enough to move down in January of 2012, and our daughter started kindergarten in August. And at first, it was a little bit of a hit to my ego, to be honest with you, because see, I was the first person in our relationship to really have the career job, because I left Hampton first, had my credentials, and I found that job at Catholic Charities very quickly. Actually, I was pregnant, but I found the job and I worked for Catholic Charities right up until the day the moving truck pulled out when we moved to North Carolina. And then when we got here, I just couldn't believe that all these resumes I was putting out there that I just wasn't getting. But I used that time to work with my kids. And in New York, you just have to keep working. And so when I gave birth, I took a standard maternity leave. I went back part-time, I think for 3 months. And then my daughter was in daycare full-time. And then when my son came along, it was like, yeah, no part-time for you. You got to get in daycare with your sister because I need the schedule to work out. And so they have an opening and you got to go in there. And so that time when we first moved here, it was great because the kids and I, we would go to the park, we would wait for David to come home from work. We would, have lots of family meals together. And it was a good time.
I remember one day coming home and you had gardening gloves on.
You all decide to open up a business called Fyzical Therapy. That I love the play on the words that you did with the FYZ.
Right. So there's a lot. That was not our original name. That is a franchise that we were about 3 years in or so when we transitioned to the franchise. So when we decided on a name for our business, I wanted a singular name. And I tried every word. I made this long list of, great words that were inspirational, one word that would speak to health or motivation or something. And they're all taken. I promise you, they're all taken. So I said, all right, can't do one word. And 2 words sounds clunky. So maybe a 3-word name. And I came up with, because Revive Physical Therapy, taken. Boost Physical Therapy is taken. Rebuild Physical Therapy is taken, but no one has Revive, Boost, Rebuild Physical Therapy. So we did it. We were RBR Physical Therapy, which is fine because I can say RBR and most of my patients can say RBR. But the woman who's writing most of the checks and corresponding with all the insurance companies and needing to write out our official name, you don't think I heard about that. that was that. We did that for a while. And then we were an army of one and we did well. We were successful. We had some concerns. We knew we wanted to grow and we were ambitious. And we had people knocking on the door really from day one with franchise opportunities. And I turned most all of them down. I laughed. For me, I feel very strongly about the way that I practice and how I treat and who I offer help to. There's lots of depth there. And I was not going to be put in a situation, really, the spirit with which we started the business. I'm not a cog in the machine. I'm not going to be in a situation where I can't set or establish or change policy. And we're going to help those marginalized people. That was it. And I was not going to sacrifice that in accepting a franchise opportunity that was then going to tell me how to run the business. I want to make a hamburger. I don't want it to taste like the Whopper. Don't tell me it has to, have this on it and that on. And so Fyzical offered that. You can take as much or as little as you want. And that spoke to us. There were so many benefits to a small business in terms of support. There was so much on her plate. There were so many hats she was wearing and she wore them well. She is arguably the most important person in the business. But if you're going to grow, it's hard to wear that many hats. And so you have to give some of that, put people in positions to be successful and allow you to grow. Joining a franchise, the right franchise, allowed us to do that. It also, I'm really good at what I do. I'm a physical therapist. I didn't go to business school. So we made some great decisions because I was pretty sure it was a great decision. I didn't know it wasn't tried and true. So now we have at our disposal a team of people who have been really ultra successful business people for their entire careers on a council that can guide us in the right direction. So to me, that was one of the major reasons why we would join Fyzical. And with respect to the name, there are folks that way smarter than me, marketing firms, that have figured out the spelling of words and names and colors and logos that will make a business more successful. But again, they don't teach you that in physical therapy. So that's part of what we're paying for, is that brilliance. And it's worked out phenomenally so far.
Now, when you first got started, what were the problems that you faced in starting a business?
We had a unique start.
I mean, some of the challenges that I will definitely speak to is lack of access to capital as wanting to go out there and start your own business. Us coming from the traditional 9-to-5 settings, we're not investors. We didn't have a bunch of property that we were going to sell for us to have liquid assets for us to make this investment in our business. But thankfully, we had family who believed in us and they believed in our vision. And my grandparents that I grew up with were entrepreneurs. We had a business in Queens where we had a gas station, and then after a gas station, we had an auto body shop and we had a used car sales lot. And so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, watching her, run her business and things like that. And so I guess that entrepreneurial spirit was always running through me. Although when I looked at my vision for myself, I didn't necessarily see myself as a business owner, but I believed that I had it in me. And we had family that believed in our vision and believed in what we could do. And so thankfully, we were able to start our business with help, just good old fashioned, here, we're going to help you out and let's work something out. And that's really a blessing, because we started our business without being in a tremendous amount of debt to any big bank institution or to any large, corporation. We used our savings. David had all of our savings. We used retirement, accounts. And we knew that if we were going to do this, that we had to just put it all on the line and do it together. I think that's the most important part.
We had always used Dama's healthcare benefits, right?
Yeah.
And so the plan wasn't initially, when I left, sorry, real quick, we started essentially a free PT clinic. I was working for a large corporation in Durham. I was watching a lot of people get left out in the cold. It was a pay to stay situation. A lot of people couldn't pay. And so I was in a situation where I was told I wouldn't, because I can. I'm here, you're here, but I won't help you because you can't stay. And that was not getting easy for me. It wasn't getting any easier. And so I enjoy sleeping well at night. And so to help with that process, we started a free PT clinic. In doing that, doors opened. I met people, networked without even knowing truly what I was doing. It was always a professional opportunity. Debbie was our volunteer receptionist, super organized. We had, electronic documentation, the whole nine, tons of volunteers. It was the purest work I ever did. And when we looked around, we had all of the makings of a business. Now, I was still working my full-time job. I got to the point where that was all I wanted to do. And in order to do that, you got to pay bills. And so we can't, do it for keeps. You got to make it legitimate. And I had to leave that full-time job. There was no more time I could carve out from my full-time job to give to this side project. And so I left my full-time job, the safety net. The plan was that Dama would, of course, with all of her binders and folders and organizational skills and talent, be a major part of it. But she wouldn't initially, anyway, leave her job. The timing worked out perfectly in retrospect, but the job that she had that we both believed was a phenomenal opportunity. It was, to that point, the highest rank. She was a state director in her field, a lot of, prestige. It was a great position, but it was toxic. And didn't really even fully understand at the time just how toxic it was. She was in a situation where her spirit told her she needed to leave. And so she did. And I remember coming home and she was curled up and she had made the decision. And that's generally something that for sure we would have spoken about. But it was that strong of a situation that she was telling me, here's what I did.
You didn't see her going behind you.
Yeah, that's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. I'm a very confident person. I knew it was going to work. At that point, it was going to work because it had to.
It had to work now.
It has to. In addition to that, now I have full-time the most brilliant, dynamic, organized person that I trust more than any other human being on the planet with me, lockstep, the whole way. That set the trajectory of our business on a completely different path that had we not done it that way, I don't know where we end up, right? Now, here we are, 6 years later, we have 3 locations, bustling, doing very well. I don't know where we are if it didn't play out that way. That seemed at the time perhaps rocky, or this wasn't the plan, but thank God that it did play out exactly the way that it did.
Absolutely.
It was like Ernest and Julio Gallo. There's no wine till it's time. And your time had come in terms of it. As far as starting a business in a area that you were not so much familiar with, other than just recently moving, what are some of the pitfalls that happened that you had to navigate through? And what are your plans going forward?
I know a few of the initial issues we had. There's a lot. Despite at that time, I had already worked 9 years in the field, 5 in New York and 4 in Durham. But there are certain elements to the business that I wasn't made privy to as a staff PT and even as a lead, managerial supervisor. Some of the billing, I was going to say conundrums, or there's intricacies that I didn't learn until we learned. Right? You bump your head and you hope you don't knock yourself out bumping your head. And we didn't, but you learn, you have to learn. And I can remember the very first week that we were open. Now I'm super ambitious, right? This is going to work because it has to work. The very first week, for the week, I'm talking about a 6-day week, we saw 8 patients. Now I know she loves me.
She's shaking her head behind you again.
That business plan you wrote, so that was a challenge too. But in doing the groundwork, again, networking without knowing we were networking, we signed up for every community event, health fair, and I knew referral sources. Before I knew how important it was to know them, I knew them and they knew me. I remember a community, at this point we had already opened. We were doing an event at Chavis Park, and it was a Saturday, and I was working in the clinic. After I finished in the clinic, I was going to run over to Chavis Park and do this health fair, and then from there I had to book it over to a patient I was seeing in her home, a 96-year-old woman who lived near that area. So it was on there in the park and surrounding the football field, surrounding the track. Dama knew the roster of who was going to be there, and there was an important physician who was in our area who was going to be there. So Dama made sure she was the first person there that day. Yep. And being the first person there, she found the organizer and she said, "Hey, buddy, I hear Dr. Such and Such is going to be here." "Where?" "What do I have to do to be at the table right beside her?" And she made that work. And I remember when I arrived, I was coming from the job, from the office, she was already chummy, right? Talking it up, and here it is right here. And, it was, oh, okay, we've already made the introduction. This is beautiful. Like that type of interaction makes the process, thinking on your feet and figuring things out, and it set our path again, the trajectory just very different. I remember that was yesterday.
Oh, for sure. And I think to your question, each time we open up a different location, it's really having to understand the demographic of that area and what's going to work. And we have the location in Raleigh. That was our first location. We opened up a second location in Garner. And now we have a third location in Lumberton, which has a very high Native American population. It's about 30 minutes south of Fayetteville.
Lumbee Indians.
Yes, Lumbee. Yep. And it's very rural. And trying to make those same connections and just being able to adjust. Because what you learn is when you open up different locations is that you can use the same formula, but you do have to make adjustments to it along the way to see what is going to work best for each location. But I will tell you that opening up a business that has multiple locations, it is almost like a family unit. And you have to give birth to one and get that up and running and successful development. And when you're going through it, you're like, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to have another one. I'm not going to do this again. And then some time goes by and then you're like, oh, look how beautiful this is. And you're like, maybe we should do this again. And I think that David and I are at that point where we're not ready to hang it up and to say we're done. I think that we agree that we see another couple of locations in the future for us. We've been looking at different areas here, probably not going to be almost 2 hours away like the one in Lumberton is. That makes it a little challenging logistically, but definitely looking at adding a couple of locations.
So you're going to actually own North Carolina. You moved from New York and then you're owning North Carolina, huh?
Hey, we're gonna try. I don't know.
Before we end, I do want to, number one, thank you all so much for being on this broadcast. And for me, it was a sort of deja vu because I started in business almost 50 years ago. And what you're saying in terms of the things that you don't know when you start, that you will know 20 years from now, is so true. But that should never stop a person from pursuing their dreams. To put it together. You have to work at it. You're going to have ups and downs, and I wish you all the best. I actually am going to look forward to meeting you all because your mother invited me down to come to the Hall of Fame October. That's what I really hope to meet you all, but I do thank you all so much for being here. And what's the name of your business again so people will know? Y'all can say it together.
Fyzical Therapy and Balance Centers.
Okay. Thank you all so much for being part of this. And that's the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. And we'll see you next week with another topic. Goodbye.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in this week. Hope you enjoyed this show about stuff. See you next time.
Branded gifts for the holidays, birthdays, or just because. Visit us at www.thebreakstore.com. Hit the right black Get in Touch button.